Hello, my name is John Didi, professor of political science at the community colleges of Baltimore County and local political media analyst. Welcome to the Maryland State Politics and Government podcast on Substack. Today, I am talking with Delegate Marc Korman from the 16th District in the state of Maryland out of Montgomery County. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
First question I want to ask today is how would you describe how the current session is going? We're about a third of the way in.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this has been one of the most intense starts to a legislative session, certainly in my years of doing this. I think, that's been informed by a few things. One, we have a new Speaker of the House, as you well know, and I think she has a different way of doing things than the predecessors I've been here for, and it's been an intense and intentional and very hardworking start, and that's mostly to the good. I think that's pretty positive that we're, not dilly-dallying, but getting to some hard issues pretty quickly and starting to work on them. And then, of course, as you know, we also were dealing with redistricting in particular, which, because of the deadlines around that, if we're going to do it, required pretty fast action. So it was a pretty hectic and intense start to our 90-day legislative session, but that's why, we get paid the big bucks. So that's fine with me.
Point there. What has been any little differences between former Speaker Jones and the new Speaker?
Well, first of all, former Speaker Jones was a great mentor to me and leader for me. When I got here, I just want to say the first subcommittee I served on, she was the subcommittee chair. So I really feel really fortunate to have had that time with her even before she was Speaker, and she was a terrific leader for our chamber. I would say Speaker Pena-Melnick is just much more involved in some of the details, and I think it might stem from the fact that she had been a standing committee chair in part. And so was used to being involved with a lot of bills pretty intensely. And so she's just much more involved across a range of policy issues, certainly working with, all the members of the House, committee chairs, subcommittee chairs, other folks, but has a much more hands-on level of involvement where I think Speaker Jones more set the overall direction, but wasn't necessarily as involved in some of those intimate details. But there's other differences as well. They're just different personalities, different backgrounds. So, of course, I think it's normal to have differences between speakers. Speaker Jones was not identical to Speaker Bush, obviously, but it's been pretty exciting to work with this new speaker.
What would you describe as your top two goals? And if you have a couple more, that's fine. If you only have one big goal for this session as far as legislation.
Sure. So I'm pretty lucky to chair the Environment and Transportation Committee, part of the speaker's leadership team. And part of the changes she made, you want to talk about a change with the new speaker, she moved around the jurisdiction of the committees, right? And so the energy portfolio that had long been the terrain of the Economic Matters Committee was moved to the Environment and Transportation Committee. And of course, that comes at a time when energy affordability is really almost everybody's front burner issue, not just mine. And so I would say that's the number one thing that I'm working on and involved with this legislative session. The number one priority is to try to help people with their energy bills. We want to remember affordability and try to make things more affordable for people. While we do that, we also need to keep a hand on our sustainability goals, and those things can work together. Energy efficiency and conservation are good for the environment and good for bills, and so those things can work together. And that's what we're trying to march forward with this legislative session. I would say for myself, in terms of my own kind of legislative priorities. As you know, I represent an area served by the WMATA system, the DC area metro system that directly serves Montgomery and Prince George's County, but is really important to the whole state of Maryland. I've been a part for the past year or so of a regional group talking about its long-term funding, and so I have legislation with Senator Augustine on that issue. That's part of a regional effort to set the DC area metro system on the right course for the future.
One question I'll ask related to energy is you get so many different answers talking to people. Sometimes they'll center around a couple things. On energy policy, do you think we should explore more nuclear, natural gas? Where do you think we should be at as far as energy? Because everyone's got the short-term idea. Let's send everyone a check. But that doesn't work in the 2035 and 2045. What would you like to see the long-term energy policies be?
Yeah, so actually, we've already done what you just said, right? So last year in the Next Generation Energy Act, under the leadership in the House of former Chair Wilson and others, we set up a streamlined process for new generation in Maryland, and the The only entrant still in that process at the PSC is a natural gas offering from Constellation. And we set up a zero emission credit program to try to help, re-jumpstart the nuclear industry. And of course, both natural gas and nuclear are huge parts of our current portfolio, really critical to keeping the lights on in Maryland currently and will be for the foreseeable future. And then again, last year in that piece of legislation, we set a course forward to have both of those things as continuing sources. So those are definitely, a part of the pie. That again, we put that pie back in the oven last year, so those things are happening. At the same time, though, I do want to acknowledge, and I think it's important to recognize this, that the shortest term generation we can get is solar and storage, right? Building a new natural gas plant, let's just say you wanted to do that, will take years. Solar and storage can be deployed and interconnected to the grid much quicker, and we have a lot of opportunity and ability to do that in the short term that we should do to help with the generation for the entire PJM grid, but of course for the state of Maryland in particular.
One issue that's come up a lot is related to the budget, as far as there's always people that see waste, fraud, and abuse, unless it's in a program, and then they kind of like the program a lot. People have talked about maybe the state needs an Office of Inspector General to kind of root out some of the problems people have noticed with the SNAP program and some other things in general. Would you be supportive of a state Office of Inspector General to kind of mind the store a little bit? Because in Montgomery County and Baltimore City, the voters love those offices.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it, although I think we might be better served by maybe keying in on some big departments and starting there, which we already have a few. For example, we have an education inspector general. Um, but I also do want to acknowledge the work of the Office of Legislative Audits, which is a part of the Department of Legislative Services, part of the legislative branch, and they do carry out a lot of those functions that you are describing. Now, they are really on the audit side of things more than the actual kind of investigations, but a lot of the things you're talking about have come to light because of those Office of Legislative Audit work products. So I do want to acknowledge their great work. So I would just want to make sure we're not sort of duplicating things or reinventing the wheel. And we already have a very well functioning Office of Legislative Audits. But I think, we should be open to having more oversight of our agencies and departments. And I don't think I don't think it's the wrong idea. I would just want to make sure we do it right and could think that possibly one place to start would be looking at more of the big departments and focusing an inspector general effort there as opposed to just having one sort of statewide figure. But I'm open to different possibilities there personally.
People often talk about the budget. And as I said, kind of said before in a way, one person's wasteful spending is another person's oxygen. Looking at the current budget, if someone handed you a red pen and said, what would you get rid of? What would you kind of say, hey, we got to change this? What would you pick? Would you look at the blueprint? What type of spending would you look at in general, as far as to try to get spending down as far as things?
Yeah. So first of all, we're very different than the federal government, as you know, but maybe some of your viewers don't, in that we actually cut things like almost every year, right? Even in good budget years, we will make budget cuts in particular areas. So it's a pretty ongoing basis that the Appropriations Committee, which I served on for 9 years, the Budget and Tax Committee, in cooperation with the Department of Legislative Services, will identify programs that aren't working as well as they could be, maybe aren't using money as efficiently as they could be, maybe have had big increases over the past few years, and so maybe you don't need as big an increase, and do those cuts, from year to year. And so, some areas that I've kind of, thought like, what's the best place to start? A program just candidly I've never been a huge fan of is called Sellinger, which is money we give to private colleges and universities in the state. So not the University System of Maryland, not the community colleges, which I know are very important to you, but the independent colleges that are not state run. That's unusual. Most states don't do that. And so that's an area where I've long said I think that's a place to find some savings. And again, because we do these things every year, we've actually done that. That program has been pared back quite a bit over my time here. So I think there's other programs like that. But it is challenging because, when you look at what the big drivers of our budget are, they tend to be things that most people actually like, right? So they might complain about the budget in the kind of in a kind of a vacuum, but when you point out to them that two-thirds of the budget is education, healthcare, and public safety, they sort of change their tune a little bit and say, "Oh, wait a second, I like those things." One of the fastest growing areas we have of our budget right now is the developmentally disabled community support we provide for that community. That is a constituency that most people on both sides of the aisle want to support, right? And so that creates a little bit of a challenge when we get into some of these conversations. And again, as you know, a lot of it's not necessarily about the year to year budget. It's about the future growth because we do balance the budget every year. And so one thing we can do, it's not necessarily a real cut in the sense of we are giving them less money, but just looking at how some of the ongoing formulas work to make sure that they're sustainable for us in the long term. On the blueprint, because I know you're probably going to ask some follow up about it, we do have this assessment coming. And a big part of the blueprint was accountability. That was one of the five pillars, and accountability means looking at what we've done and seeing how it's working and making changes from there. And that assessment is coming, and I think is going to allow us an opportunity to think about, what's working, what's not. A lot of the attention on the blueprint is about how much it costs, but what I'm more interested in is what we're buying, not just the total dollar amount, but what we're getting for that dollar amount.
Then I think of as far as the blueprint, that kind of puzzles me a little bit. I've talked to county officials and they just fear the future of what will they'll be obligated for. And the other factor with the blueprint is the fact that enrollments, because we have to go back about 20 years, are going down because there's fewer kids. And I think that's one thing maybe you can comment on. Also, as far as the private college funding, I've never understood why we're giving Johns Hopkins money when they have an endowment that could fund various parts of the state budget.
Right. And so I will say on that, I feel maybe a little bit better about giving Hood College some support than I do about Johns Hopkins, right? And I'm not saying Johns Hopkins isn't important to our state and our community. Of course they are. They're a very valuable player. But again, most other states are not providing their private colleges and universities this kind of ongoing funding. Yeah, on enrollment, it's a huge challenge. And obviously when the blueprint was passed, we didn't expect certain things to happen that have really affected enrollment. So just focusing on Montgomery County had been fast growing for a very long time. And that really came to a stop with COVID for lots of reasons that we probably don't have time to get into. But it, hadn't recovered from that when a new problem came, which is, I believe, a big part of the reason we're seeing a decline in enrollment in many of our jurisdictions and a decline in free and reduced meal students in many of our jurisdictions is because students are not showing up because of immigration fears, and their families are keeping them home. And so we've created a much larger sort of shadow economy, shadow society by the way we're dealing with immigration enforcement in this country right now. And I think it is having an effect on our schools. That is not the only driver. I want to be clear. As I said, in Montgomery County, the enrollment changes started before that. But I do think that is a factor in what we're seeing, especially on the free and reduced meal side, because we know we didn't all of a sudden have a student population that is that much wealthier that they don't need that support. There's a chunk of the population that seems to have just stopped going to school.
I've noticed a lot of times, a lot of that is people with COVID, et cetera, they move their kids to private schools or they move the homeschooling, which to me is becoming a lot more popular. If I was a parent, I'd need 6 hours away from away
Yeah.
from my kids.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's definitely right. And you'll also see a counter to that. The next time there's a recession, you'll see a bunch of kids from private schools suddenly show back in the public schools, which is what we experienced with the Great Recession back in, the 2007, 2008 timeframe. I obviously hope that doesn't happen anytime soon. But, these things have a cycle to them.
One word I have heard Democrats use a lot, starting with the mayor's race in New York City with Mondami, and I've started to hear more Republicans talk about it on the energy issue. The word affordability. That seems to be political word this year. Democrats, I think, have a little bit easier of a time working it than Republicans do, but Republicans in Maryland, I notice, are working affordability and energy hand in hand. Do you feel that not an overall issue of picking one specific thing? Do you feel that on election day, most people are really going to think about what's in my pocket, affordability, how am I sustaining myself?
So I think that is an important issue to people, and I think you're a student of this, so you know why James Carville came up with "It's the economy, stupid," right? It's
Yep.
because it works. On the other hand, I think when many people go to the polls, they're going to think about their ability to go to the polls in the future, and they're going to think about this current president, and they're going to want a different direction at the national level, and their down ballot votes are going to be heavily influenced by that. I think it is unusual. Maybe it's becoming more common, as our politics get more nationalized, but it is unusual how the visceral response to the particular human being in the White House right now drives elections. You look at the history of special elections in the past year, right? Huge
Oh, yes.
swings to Democrats in some very unexpected places. I think you're going to continue to see that play out. But regardless of the electoral implications, I think as Democrats, we want to make it easier for families to buy their food, buy their housing, buy their health care, buy their energy. So I think regardless of the sort of electoral implications, the reason many of us are Democrats is because we are thinking about families and people that way. And so we want to do things to make their lives more affordable and a little bit easier and hopefully have a little bit of money left at the end of the week or the end of the month to, buy their kids a meal out at a restaurant or a toy or a book.
Final question I want to ask, and I like to ask political leaders this because it gives you a really good window on people. When you think of political leaders of the past, from the time you were five to even last week, who were the ones you kind of like saw as people to admire that you wanted to walk in their footsteps, you wanted to be able to meet them, the people that kind of inspired you into public office, or the people that you look at a little bit of like a North Star?
Yeah, so I'm going to go further back than when I was a kid, and then I'll give you the one from when I was a kid, if that's all right.
Okay.
So further back, kind of an obscure one that you probably know is Senator Estes Kefauver from Tennessee, who was a big political leader in the 1950s. He did the organized crime hearings in the Senate, some of the first televised hearings. He ran for president a couple of times, and it was very much a people-powered campaign. He did very well in the primaries, which were just emerging then. Didn't do as well with the political bosses. A bit of a populist. So I have a lot of appreciation for him, and have read a lot about him, and always been very interested in him. Of course, he died in 1963, so a little before I was 5 years old. To your question, when I was a kid coming up. And this is certainly a flawed figure, but Ted Kennedy was the Kennedy of my youth, right? So my
Oh,
parents'
yes.
generation, JFK, RFK, but to me, Ted Kennedy was the living Kennedy. He was the connection to that past, but also the sort of North Star on sort of ideology that I was subscribing to, right? And so you would look to him as a thought leader on the left side of things. But the thing I liked about him, in addition to him sort of being a moral leader of the left, and I know he wasn't always I wouldn't say his morality was 100%, but in terms of his political sense, he was the sort of the moral leader of the left. He was very willing to work with the right. Time and again, he would put his hand out and shake John McCain's hand or George W. Bush's hand or, all the different folks over the years and come up with compromises. So yes, he could give thundering oratory and gave great speeches, but he also was willing to roll his sleeves up and compromise with the other side and actually accomplish things. And as you know, a lot of that is now missing in our national politics. Thankfully, it's still alive and well in our state politics. The oratory is probably not as good, but the deal making is still there. The compromise is still there. And so that's why I have a great appreciation for Ted Kennedy.
Still remember watching his speech at the 1980 Democratic Convention and the ending of that speech, "The dream shall never die."
So when
And
I was
I
first,
even have chills right now when I said the words.
yeah, when I was first getting involved in politics, it was in the George W. Bush years. And after a very bad 2002 midterms, my dad sent me the end of that speech, and I had not really known that speech before that. I knew who Ted Kennedy was, but hadn't really, that speech was before I was born, I hate to tell you. And so it was definitely an inspiring, lifting moment. And then I remember in the 2008 cycle, Ted Kennedy's endorsement of Barack Obama gave many older, whiter Democrats a sort of permission structure to be for Barack Obama in a weird way. Him coming out for Barack Obama when he did. And so he was really an important voice in the Democratic Party for many decades.
I agree with you as far as when Kennedy did that, it got all the headlines you wanted to get. And I thought you used an excellent word, permission structure,
Yeah.
because of the fact that Obama was seen as so new and Ted Kennedy had known the Clintons for 30 years.
Yeah. Well, it flipped my mom's vote. So that's my barometer.
Well, anything that it takes to flip someone's vote to the way they should go, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Thank you again for your time and take care and have a good day and good luck this legislative session.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
You're welcome.